The moment Judge Harrison told attorney Maya Williams to let the real lawyers handle this, he had no idea he was speaking to the youngest Harvard Law Review editor in history.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment before we start to learn more about what happened.
The fluorescent lights in the Fulton County Courthouse flickered slightly as Maya Williams adjusted her briefcase strap and walked through the metal detectors. At 6:30 a.m., the building was nearly empty except for security guards and a few early arriving attorneys. Maya preferred it this way. The quiet gave her time to think, to prepare, to center herself before facing another day of assumptions and underestimation. She had been awake since 4 a.m., reviewing case files and legal precedents for State versus Marcus Thompson. The 19-year-old was charged with armed robbery, and the evidence was shakier than a house of cards in a windstorm. But Maya knew that in the criminal justice system, shaky evidence could still destroy lives if not properly challenged. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she made her way to Courtroom 3B. Judge Robert Harrison presided here, a man with a reputation for running a tight ship and having little patience for what he considered time-wasting. Maya had appeared before him twice before, and both times she had felt his skeptical gaze weighing her, measuring her, finding her somehow lacking. The courtroom was a study in intimidation, high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and portraits of stern-faced judges from decades past. Maya had learned early in her career that these spaces were designed to make people feel small, to remind them of the power wielded by those in black robes. She sat up at the defense table methodically. 3 legal pads filled with notes, color-coded tabs marking critical sections of case law, and a folder containing the real bombshell evidence that the prosecution had somehow overlooked. Maya believed in being prepared for every possible argument, every potential objection, every twist the case might take. At 8:45 a.m., the courtroom began to fill. The prosecutor, David Martinez, arrived looking confident, his expensive suit and polished shoes announcing his status in the legal hierarchy. Maya had researched him too. 5 years experience, decent conviction rate, but a tendency to rely on emotion over evidence when his cases got shaky. Judge Harrison entered at precisely 9 a.m., and everyone rose. At 58, he carried himself with the authority of someone who had never seriously been challenged in his own domain. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his robe crisp and imposing. He surveyed his courtroom like a king surveying his kingdom. "Be seated," Judge Harrison commanded, settling into his chair with practiced ease. He opened the case file and frowned slightly. State versus Marcus Thompson, armed robbery in the first degree. He looked up, scanning the attorneys. "Is counsel present and ready to proceed?" Martinez stood. "David Martinez for the state, Your Honor. Ready to proceed." Judge Harrison's eyes moved to the defense table, where Maya remained seated, reviewing her opening notes. The silence stretched for several seconds before he spoke. "And defense counsel? Are we waiting for the defense attorney to arrive?" Maya looked up, meeting his gaze directly. She had anticipated this moment. "Your Honor, I am defense counsel, Maya Williams, representing Mr. Thompson." Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, and Maya caught the familiar flicker of surprise followed by skepticism. She had seen it hundreds of times, in law school lecture halls, at job interviews, in client meetings, and yes, in courtrooms. "I see." Judge Harrison made a note on his pad. "And you're with the public defender's office, Miss Williams?" The emphasis on Miss instead of counselor wasn't lost on Maya. "Yes, Your Honor." He shuffled through papers with deliberate slowness, each page turn seeming to increase his skepticism. "How long have you been practicing law, Miss Williams?" Maya straightened her shoulders. 3 years, Your Honor." 3 years. Judge Harrison repeated the words as if they were a diagnosis of terminal illness. He glanced toward the prosecutor's table, then back to Maya. And this is quite a serious case we have here. Armed robbery. A young man's future hangs in the balance. Yes, Your Honor. I'm fully aware of the gravity of the charges. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on what Maya recognized as a patronizing tone she'd heard from professors, senior partners, and now judges. Miss Williams, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but are you absolutely certain you're qualified to handle a case of this magnitude? This isn't a simple misdemeanor we're dealing with. The question hit the courtroom like a physical presence. Maya felt the shift in energy, the way conversations had quieted, how even the court reporter looked up from her machine. Everyone was suddenly paying attention. I am fully qualified, Your Honor. Judge Harrison's expression suggested he found her confidence misplaced. Now, I'm sure you've prepared adequately, but preparation and experience are two very different things. In my 20 years on this bench, I've seen many well-meaning attorneys get in over their heads. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 20 years on the bench, and he still judged attorneys by their appearance rather than their capabilities. Your Honor, I've thoroughly reviewed every aspect of this case. I'm sure you have. Judge Harrison's tone grew more condescending. But, Miss Williams, let me be frank with you. Your client is facing serious time if convicted. This isn't the place for on-the-job training. Have you considered perhaps requesting that the court appoint a more experienced attorney? Someone with more substantial trial experience. Even Prosecutor Martinez shifted uncomfortably at his table. Maya could see in his expression that he understood this was crossing a line, but he remained silent. Maya stood slowly, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, I am prepared to represent my client to the full extent of my abilities. That's admirable, Judge Harrison replied, waving his hand dismissively. Your dedication is commendable, but dedication isn't the same as competence. In a case like this, with a young man's future at stake, perhaps it would be better to let the real lawyers handle this. The words landed like a physical blow. Maya had heard variations of this sentiment her entire career, but coming from the bench, in open court, they carried devastating weight. She felt her client shift beside her, saw the confusion in his eyes as he wondered if his own attorney was being told she wasn't good enough to defend him. Maya took a measured breath. Your Honor, I am a real lawyer. Judge Harrison chuckled softly, a sound that carried no warmth. Of course, of course. I simply meant someone with more seasoned experience, someone who's been around the block a few times. He turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Martinez, do you have any concerns about proceeding with current counsel? Martinez hesitated, clearly caught between professional courtesy and the political reality of disagreeing with the presiding judge. No objections from the state, Your Honor. Judge Harrison looked genuinely disappointed by the response. He drummed his fingers on the bench, considering his options. Very well, Miss Williams, but I want to make something absolutely clear. I will not tolerate any delays, any amateur mistakes, any unprofessional conduct, or any attempts to turn this courtroom into some kind of learning laboratory. This is a court of law, not a law school clinic. Is that understood? Perfectly understood, Your Honor. Good. I hope so. Now, are you ready to proceed with opening statements, or do you need more time to prepare? Even his offer of additional preparation time was delivered as an insult, implying she wasn't ready for the basic requirements of trial advocacy. Maya looked at her client, Marcus Thompson, who sat beside her with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was barely out of high school, working 2 jobs to help his mother pay rent, and now facing years in prison based on identification testimony that wouldn't hold up under proper scrutiny. He deserved better than a judge who had already written off his attorney. Your Honor, Maya said, her voice gaining strength, before we proceed with opening statements, I believe it's important to address the court's concerns about my qualifications. Judge Harrison's expression hardened into something approaching anger. That won't be necessary, Counselor. With respect, Your Honor, I believe it is necessary. Maya's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath now. You've questioned my experience multiple times, suggested I'm not qualified to represent my client, and implied that I'm not a real lawyer. I think the record should be absolutely clear about my background and qualifications. Counselor, I'm warning you. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I finished first in my class with a GPA of 4.0. Judge Harrison's hand froze over his gavel. I was editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review, the youngest person to hold that position in the publication's 134-year history. During my tenure, I edited articles by Supreme Court justices, federal appellate judges, and the nation's leading legal scholars. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. During law school, I worked as a research assistant for Professor Lawrence Tribe, one of the most respected constitutional law scholars in the country. I helped him research and draft amicus briefs for 3 Supreme Court cases, all of which were cited in the majority opinions. Judge Harrison's face had begun to pale. I've published 7 articles in peer-reviewed legal journals, including the Harvard Law Review, the Yale Law Journal, and the Columbia Law Review. My work has been cited in over 50 law review articles and 3 federal court decisions. Maya pulled out a folder from her briefcase, her movements deliberate and precise. Before joining the public defender's office, I clerked for Judge Patricia Williams on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where I helped research and draft opinions on over 200 cases. 3 of those opinions were later cited by the Supreme Court. She opened the folder, revealing neatly organized documents. I've argued cases before the Georgia Supreme Court twice, winning both on Fourth Amendment grounds. I've also submitted amicus briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Judge Harrison's usual confidence had completely evaporated. His face was now visibly flushed. I speak 3 languages fluently, hold certifications in criminal procedure from the National Institute for Trial Advocacy, and have completed advanced training programs at both the Harvard Law School Trial Advocacy Workshop and the Georgetown University Criminal Justice Clinic. Maya paused, letting the weight of her credentials settle over the courtroom like fog. So when you ask if I'm qualified to handle this case, Your Honor, the answer is not only yes, but I'm likely more qualified than most attorneys who regularly practice in this courthouse, including, with all due respect, some who sit on this bench. The silence that followed was so complete that Maya could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Judge Harrison stared at her, his mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process what he had just heard. Finally, he cleared his throat. Then he cleared it again. I apologize, Counselor. I made inappropriate assumptions about your qualifications. Apology accepted, Your Honor. Now, if we may proceed with the case. Judge Harrison nodded slowly, still looking shaken. Yes, please proceed with your opening statement. Maya turned to face the jury, her transformation complete. Gone was any trace of the attorney who had been questioned and dismissed. In her place stood someone who commanded the room through sheer competence and presence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Maya Williams, and I represent Marcus Thompson. Over the next few days, the prosecution will try to convince you that my client is guilty of armed robbery based on the testimony of a single witness who viewed the alleged crime from 200 feet away at night for less than 10 seconds. For the next 20 minutes, Maya delivered an opening statement that was masterful in its precision and devastating in its logic. She cited case law from memory, referenced specific evidentiary standards, and outlined reasonable doubt with the skill of someone who had spent years mastering every nuance of criminal defense. When it came time for witness examination, Maya's expertise became even more apparent. She cross-examined the prosecution's key witness with surgical precision, exposing inconsistencies in his testimony that the prosecutor had completely missed. When Martinez tried to introduce questionable evidence, Maya cited 3 relevant Supreme Court cases that excluded it, forcing the judge to sustain her objections. During the lunch recess, the atmosphere in the courthouse had completely changed. Other attorneys whispered about the morning's events. Court staff who had witnessed Judge Harrison's humiliation spread the story through the building. Prosecutor Martinez approached Maya in the hallway, looking genuinely curious. "Maya, I have to ask, with your credentials, you could be making partner at any major firm in the country. Why the public defender's office?" Maya smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown all day. "Because this is where I'm needed, David. Everyone deserves excellent representation, not just people who can afford $500 an hour attorneys. The Constitution doesn't have an asterisk that says, unless you're poor." When court reconvened, Judge Harrison's entire demeanor had transformed. He listened attentively to Maya's arguments, asked thoughtful legal questions, and treated her with the respect he should have shown from the beginning. More importantly, he began actually paying attention to the substance of the case rather than the surface-level assumptions he had made. The trial continued for 2 days. Maya systematically dismantled the prosecution's case, presenting alternative theories backed by solid evidence. She brought in expert witnesses on eyewitness identification reliability, challenged the chain of custody on physical evidence, and presented alibi testimony that the prosecution couldn't refute. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a not guilty verdict on all charges. As the courtroom cleared, Judge Harrison approached Maya at the defense table. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Counselor Williams, I owe you far more than an apology. What I did this morning was not only unprofessional, it was inexcusable." Maya looked up from packing her briefcase. "Thank you for acknowledging that, Your Honor. You're not just a competent attorney, you're an exceptional one. Your client was extraordinarily fortunate to have you representing him." Maya nodded. "He deserved nothing less than my best effort. Every defendant does." Judge Harrison paused, clearly struggling with something. "May I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. How many times has this happened to you? Other judges, other courtrooms, other attorneys making the same assumptions I made?" Maya considered the question carefully. "More often than it should, Your Honor, but less often than it used to. Change happens slowly, but it does happen." Judge Harrison shook his head. "It's not acceptable, and I want you to know it will never happen in my courtroom again. I'm going to make sure every attorney who appears before me is judged solely on their legal skills and preparation." As Maya walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, her phone buzzed with messages. News of the morning's events had already begun spreading through Atlanta's legal community. But the message that meant the most came from her former boss, Judge Patricia Williams. "Heard about your victory today. Not just the case, the bigger victory. Proud of you. Keep showing them what real lawyering looks like." Maya smiled as she walked to her car. Tomorrow would bring another case, another client, another opportunity to prove that excellence speaks louder than assumptions. Because true power isn't about the judgments people make when they first see you. It's about the truth that emerges when those judgments crumble under the weight of reality.